Good afternoon, Chair Postman, members Garrett and Bollendroff, staff and guests. The lobbies are open and the recording has begun.
Thanks, Dustin. Good afternoon, everybody. We'll convene the LCB's executive management team for Wednesday, November 8th, 2023. We're going to do a little different order today. We'll start with our general agency update with our Deputy Director, Tony Hood.
Thank you, Chair Postman. Good afternoon, members Bollendroff, members Garrett. I want to start with our very generous staff here at LCB and talk about our CFD fundraising. They have been absolutely amazing. The staff have raised over $14,000 so far, and we're not even done with our CFD events. The goal this year that the CFD committee set was $12,000, so we've already exceeded that goal. We have very generous and very active members of our agency. Just some highlights this year. Some of the really big fundraisers were the E&E gift basket auction, which they do at their in-service meeting that raised over $2,600. Our canned food drive here at the headquarters raised over $3,000. And I hope I don't get this wrong. I believe that, was it licensing that won the floor? Did I get that wrong? I did get it wrong.
I think it was.
Was it?
It was licensing.
It was licensing? Yeah. Okay. Oh, I thought she was shaking her head no. Okay. So licensing brought in the most for that. And then the other large winner or money one was Division's online silent auction for over $1,100. So there are still more events coming with the licensing Thankful Candygram and the Division jars. They're putting a change in jars on the different floors. So thank you for everyone who helps with that. The agency is doing a great job. The other thing I have to report on was that, of course, the last 2 days we did an off-site strategic planning meeting. Thank you, members Garrett and Bollendroff, for contributing your SWOT comments. Jessica Dang took us through your comments when we were putting up our SWOT comments about our weaknesses, our strengths, our opportunities, and we talked about all of those. We were able to talk about our values, and we defined some of those values, or we did draft definitions for those. We did some proposed draft goals in the last 2 days, and we also did some objectives. We will be sharing these ideas via Jessica with a group of people that come from all the different divisions. There's a member from each division in a subgroup. And that group of people will look at those, make comments, make revisions, suggestions, and then they will come back to us. They will also work on the strategies which go underneath the objectives. So we have a lot more work to do to get to a final plan, but we did a lot of work, I think, in getting to defining our values and getting some good proposed draft goals and objectives. So big thanks to Jessica Dang for keeping us on track. She also gave us lots of different activities to do to give us some variety throughout the day, which made the 2 days go better.
Can I just say one thing on that, Tony, for the benefit of the other board members? And I think, and part of this process, which I have yet to figure out, we all need to figure out, is how we have a bigger conversation with the board, and that may just be in one of these meetings at some point or something like that, where we can lay it all out. The draft, certainly at least at the highest level, the mission statement, goals, maybe objective, but not, we don't need all, where you two have full opportunity to weigh in on those words and thoughts and everything like that. So we'll figure that out, and I'm going to attend the staff meeting, the first staff meeting at least, just to be able to help them understand where the board's coming from on this and hear from them their reaction to what we've come up with so far. There'll be a second one of those, and that's an opportunity that another board member could attend. But I think we do want to try to get it in a place where the three of us can all talk amongst ourselves and with staff, and we'd have to do that at a venue like this. So we'll see what we can do. Okay, thanks.
Regarding SMP, we are working on a new schedule. It has been difficult. We have yet to reach an agreement with our integrator on what that new schedule should be. So we continue to work on that. They're proposing a new working process that's not iterative. It's what we've been doing. Iterative is what we've been doing thus far. They're proposing a new way of doing it, and we haven't been able to get enough information from them to be comfortable with the new schedule yet. I have given them a deadline for this, which is before the end of the month, that we need to reach agreement on this. We need to also amend our contract, which will be a heavy lift once we get the new proposed schedule done. But part of this process is me giving them a deadline so they understand that we have made that clear, that that's our expectation. So we're working through that. We are having some difficulties filling some internal IT positions that are necessary for SMP. So wish us luck, I guess. We are trying everything we can do to get those internal IT positions filled. And I would lastly say that we are looking forward to December to see the governor's budget, to see if our decision packages are funded in that budget. As we talk about resources, I know a lot of the divisions, especially licensing, is looking to see if those DPs are funded so that we can get those FTEs and appropriately resource the needs of the agency. Thank you.
Any questions, Tony? See none? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Let's do, speaking of DPs, legislature, Mark Webster.
Good afternoon, Chair Postman and members Bollendroth and Garrett. So I mentioned a few months ago that there had been kind of a change in the pace of interim where it had gone from completely quiet to maybe a little bit noisy. I think we've hit our second inflection point where it's gone from a little bit noisy to deafening. While we were at our offsite strategic planning, I heard from a staffer in the House who said that it already felt like session this week. It's not like that for me, clearly, but it's certainly getting closer. And I mention that because we're not only getting those requests and inquiries from legislative staff, we're getting those and it can't wait timeframes to respond. And I say that as much for the other directors as for you board members. On our agency request, the governor's office had asked some questions, and that led to a slight revision, which we talked about with our AAGs. The policy remains the same, but we've added an intent section to really make it clear what we are intending with the policy. I think there was the concern that they or others could read it as an and. You know, you have a criminal and an administrative, and what we're trying to do is you know, make it an or. So we've kind of spelled that out in the intent section. So I think that should address some of those concerns.
Have you sent that?
It's at the code revisors right now, but it should be back any day now.
We came up with.
Yeah, and that was a suggestion from our AAGs, which I think is a good one, just to remove any ambiguity. So we'll have, I think, more to say on pre-filed bills and proposals, but maybe now we can take a look back. And so, Dustin, can you bring up the implementation tracker? Great, thank you. Not going to go through all of it, but maybe if you could just kind of scroll down. I think what we're starting to see is a lot more of these, or a lot more of these items moving into the completed status. We have a couple of things that I should draw your attention to. The alcohol delivery report in 5448 was due November 1st. That's still listed as on track. Again, we got some, but we needed OFM and governor's office approval. We have the latter. We're just waiting on the former. That should be any day now. We hope it's done. It's been done. We're ready to hit the button there, but I just have to get that approval. And then I've heard from Becky that the DIA maps for Senate Bill 5080, the social equity, the new DIA maps are back from the contractor, and so those should be up and ready. So again, two more items that should be flipping over into completed status very soon. And again, I just want to say that all of this stuff represents a lot of work in every single division of the agency, and it's a lot of really good work. And then we have an exit conference coming up this month on the JLARC report that had to do with the dedicated cannabis account. That we've seen the preliminary report. I think the final report comes out in January. And then we're going into another JLARC report on cannabis canopy. And that was one of the items in the social equity bill in 5080.
Do they call it canopy or is that production?
Yeah, I think it's getting at the same thing.
Well, that's what I wondered. It'll be interesting because we had discussions, you know, almost whatever that was 2 years ago. Like, are we measuring canopy, controlling production, the interplay of the two?
Right, and I think from what I'm told with some of the data, it can be tough to tease those things apart.
Yeah. Okay.
So they've requested a lot of that data. They might find, but we'll see what happens with that. The last thing, finance staff and I are scheduled for meetings both with OFM staff as well as legislative fiscal staff to go over questions on our TP. So that part of the process is heating up.
And then will you let us know if it looks like any of those are a harder sell at OFM?
Sure.
If we need to talk to anybody after that. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Licensing update with Becky Smith, Licensing and Regulation Director.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. So I wanted to share with all of you some of the information that we went through for our results this last quarter. It's been some time since we've done results in the licensing division. I want to say we haven't done them since COVID. So although we had information that we were tracking, we certainly didn't, we weren't going through the information with staff. So this gave us a chance to really take a close look, and staff to take a close look at the data that they were collecting to make sure that they were collecting the right data. And so I'm excited for you to see it. I just also want to say thank you to those directors, Chandra, Justin, others who attended that session. It was very helpful. So this quarter in customer service, as you can see here, that they issued 999 special occasion applications. We were nearing the end of the busy season for special occasion licenses, thank goodness. So we're predicting next quarter we'll see a drop. With special occasion applications, they should be submitted by the applicant at least 45 days prior to the event, just to give staff enough time to review the application, send out the local authority notices, and issue the license. We're happy to say that those processing times for last quarter were an average of 29 days. I'm not saying we don't need the 45 days. I'm saying that we've done a really good job in issuing them within those 29 days. Next slide, there we go. So phase 1 of the pilot program has concluded. The unit has started a pilot program phase 2, so 2.0 we call it, which contains some changes based on both the feedback we received from the industry, so from those applicants, but also from staff. Overall, the results for the first pilot program were very positive. The chart on the left here compares processing times for the files that were processed during the pilot versus the same license types that were processed prior to the pilot program. This shows that during the pilot program, the average amount of days to issue an application improved by 24 days. That the chart on the right compares the pilot and non-pilot retail applications assigned since the start of the program. For the non-pilot applicants, this included all other retail license types that were not included in the pilot program. This shows that during the pilot program, all files were processed faster as well. Again, all very positive, right? We go to fix one thing and we end up, fixing something else, which again has been a positive outcome for us. So the second pilot program, so the 2.0, will now, instead of 60 days, instead of 45 days, we're going to issue in 60 days. That goes to what we heard from our applicants, was that they needed a little bit more time. And we're also moving a couple of licensing specialists into that pilot program, and we're adding additional license types as well. So also shortly after the 45-day pilot program began in the second quarter, changes were made to timelines for initial contact by the applicants from their licensing specialist. I will say that, the timelines for the outreach, 5 days for folks doesn't seem like a long time, but it is when you're on the other side of that application, when you're the one submitting the application and you've submitted it 10 days ago, and 5 of those days were eaten up by BLS, and now all of a sudden you're waiting to hear from LCB. So we changed that for contact to be made within 2 business days. As shown on the graph, the initial contact was made under 2 days for 63% of the applicants, with an additional 26 still remaining under the 5-day goal. Again, like 3 to 5 days. We're shooting for those 2 days. It really is what we want to see. This process has also changed, that the improvement of communication with the applicant has resulted in the initial interview being completed in a shorter amount of time. So folks are ready to go. They want to do their interview. They're getting their paperwork back to us. And so the average day to complete the initial interview now is 5 days. Go ahead, next slide. And so this is the cannabis unit. So in January, in January of 2023, that the cannabis unit was charged with some ways to increase their processing time. So we wanted to shorten the time it took for an application to be completed. Prior to January, the average processing time was 134 days. And a lot of time, right? So we were in the middle of COVID. We were giving folks whatever time they needed to process their application. What we found was that there was a lot of applications that just sat there. And whether it was on the applicant just kind of taking their time, that again, there was an issue with, getting what they needed in order to make the changes in their businesses. So we changed the processing time. We asked that the goal for completing the application be within 90 days. So during this last quarter, the unit was meeting that goal. And then I will tell you that I do have some updates for social equity, but social equity wasn't included in our quarterly our quarterly results because we haven't yet started to determine what we're going to be looking at as far as the data and what we're going to be measuring. So last piece is our policy and education. I will say that that I think if you guys all remember that Chandra and our teams went away, enforcement licensing, we went away to do some work with how to work more collaboratively, that how to have some consensus on things. And we also committed to doing some ride-alongs, and we've done that. The ride-alongs aren't just about meeting the person that's in your area doing the final inspection. It really is for our licensing specialists to see what they're licensing. So because sometimes what we found is that what we approve isn't always what someone builds. So it's we've done some joint visits with Captain Zubay, Commander Zubay, and Officer Lauke. We visited Showbox, Soto, Team Mobile. Folks were able to review the facility layout and the operation plan. Again, very positive for our staff. We've also had opportunities to attend a couple of non-retail final inspections and also attend a tasting room premise check with Officer Seltzer. Again, I know it takes time for our officers to have our staff join them, but it's been helpful for the work that we're doing together. And then for training, Nicola Reed and Paul Magrill did some training on processes of revocations of licenses. We've also did some training with tobacco training, not because we want to license tobacco in the licensing unit, but to provide the liquor unit with some information. And then also some training on Class 21 permit resources were shared with the officers. Again, all of this collaboration is so positive for the work that we're doing, especially for our customers and the folks that we're serving. So a big thank you to Chandra and her staff for helping us with this. The one last thing I want to mention is if you remember week before, we talked a little bit about local authority notices for our social equity applicants. So I did want to follow back up and let folks know that we have contacted and sent out letters to 208 local authorities, and that's the cities and towns. So those are all cities and towns within the allotment. So where folks are going to get licensed in. And so that's why it's such a small amount, the 208. And then all of the applicants received notification as well. And so again, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't just a letter that we were sending out to the local authorities, but we also followed up with a letter and a phone call to all of our applicants. We only received one inquiry, and that inquiry was really not about the allotments that LCB did, but was more about the local authorities, that we have allotments and then local authorities have their allotments. And sometimes they're not the same. Sometimes they're much less than what LCB has allotted. So again, one question, one reach out. We continue to have, we're continuing to work through the process, which is terrific. So with that, I want to see if there's any questions.
That's what I was calling you about earlier today.
Oh.
So you just reported it. And my only question was going to be, was there any feedback from the local authorities after they received the letters? But you're saying you haven't heard anything.
We did receive feedback from the one local authority, which sent us their I think it was Marysville. They sent us their requirement for what's required for somebody to get licensed. And what they're really saying is that they're not going to allow anybody to get licensed in that area.
Okay. Did we receive any feedback from the applicants that whether or not that was helpful or any of that type of, or did they understand what they were getting from us?
They didn't. So yes, so we did receive before the letter was sent to them, the licensed investigator reached out and made contact with them. And so they also let them know that if they have further questions or concerns in the future, like they're dealing with the local authority and they need us, we'll certainly do that. Sarah's been on those phone calls as well as the investigator.
Okay, thank you.
Will you send
You're
us
welcome.
copies of the letters that went both ways? So
Yep.
it would help us to be able to all stay on the same page.
Yes, absolutely. I'll have staff send those to you this afternoon. And I just wanted to mention one last thing was that I just wanted to clarify about the DIA maps, because even though we have received the information and the map back, I do have questions. I met with my staff today, and so we're going to be going back to ask some questions of folks and also have a conversation with our Attorney General, just to make sure again that we're hitting everything that we need to and we're required to. So they're not ready yet to share is what I guess what I'm saying.
Member Vollenhoff, you got a question?
More of a comment. So thank you, Becky, for your report. Very good. I'm extremely pleased to see the collaboration between the two divisions within the LCB. I wanted to thank both you and Director Wax for that specifically. But I also wanted to just make comment about the ride-alongs. While we didn't hear about ride-alongs when we did staff focus groups, we did hear about job shadowing. And although they're distinctly different, they are somewhat, in that same line of seeing what's happening in other divisions and connecting with your coworkers that work in other areas. And staff are asking for that. So I just really wanted to thank you guys for doing that. And I can imagine it being very helpful to actually see in practice what you're approving. So thank you for that.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Next up is the other half of the collaboration, enforcement education with Director Chandra Wax.
Good afternoon. I would just like to thank Dustin Dixon in advance for driving my slides for me today. Thank you, Dustin. He always can read my mind and know just when to switch slides. So that's very nice. And thanks for having me here today to share with you the great work of enforcement. I always start with just a look at how many licenses our officers are having contact with and managing, so that we're able to put things into, I'm able to put things into a frame of reference when I'm looking at this data. Sometimes percentages can be a little misleading for us when we're thinking of exactly the volume of work that's happening. So I just start there. When we look at complaints, I do want to point out that this is a look at the last 3 months of the complaints that we've received, and I have it broken down by unit here. And as you will notice, as we go through here, we continue to break out our consultants as part of our education team. And I will share that 42% of our cannabis complaints were internal, which means initiated by an officer on site. And then 30% of our tobacco and vapor were internal. And we don't have that number yet for liquor, so I'll have to share that with you next month. A really exciting thing about this slide, we've been seeing it for a while now. We want to look at exactly the percentage of our complaints that are related directly to public safety. This number, these percentage numbers have been fairly consistent and not doing a lot of changing for about a year now. So we can pretty safely say that these are our percentages of complaints that we're responding to that are related directly to those things we consider our highest impact on public safety: over service, staff conduct, and then sale to a minor. We start looking at education and violations, and this is a breakdown for 21, 22, and 2023 to date. You can see that we will end up with doing substantially more education than last year. And then you can see the differences there, left to right, in our AVNs, NTCs, and warnings. And you can see how we're using those tools. You can see that that NTC continues to be a much more largely used tool this year, in part because that's something that our education team is using, just to make sure that they're using that as a tool to get towards compliance. When we look at licensee education, we will be on track for pretty similar numbers when we look at total number of contacts in the fourth quarter of 2023 that we had in the third quarter. And then when we break those numbers down by unit, we're really able to see the impact that our consultants are having on our education. And we're also able to see that our officers in the field are continuing to do a lot of education work too. So these are all really positive things about our contact with our licensees over the past few years. When we start to look at August, September, and October, I can tell you that we had a total of 379 hours of education in October, and you can see the number of contacts we had here laid out. Or again, really shining here, our liquor and consultants for the month of October coming in at substantially higher than our September numbers. We start to look at those education topics. You can see that traceability comes back there in number 5. So we have been implementing some new CCRS reports. And so the amount of education we do in that area increases when we have a new release, either about to come out or coming out during a time period. Then we can look at the breakdown of our violations, our administrative violation notices, or AVNs, as compared to warnings, and then bringing those NTCs into the mix for the cannabis side as well. And then when we start looking at topics on NTC, this is probably a little bit surprising to see operating and floor plan as the top issue, and to see 28 of those. That's a new thing for us. And so when we looked specifically at this data, we found that there was one operator with 14 locations that didn't have any floor plans on hand. So we were able to go in and make sure that those happened in a timely fashion. And that was something that our education team took care of for us. So that's why that number seems larger than usual. And then when we start to look at that topic of administrative violation notices, you'll see again that the service of alcohol to persons under 21 really dominates this area, which is something that's good to see that we're addressing any of those issues that we find. We have 62 violations in this area that resulted from 234 checks. So we'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to our compliance area of reporting. Then we get into our warning topics. I think it's always interesting and really reassuring when we look at our data and we see the difference between the topics that we're writing AVNs about and that we're writing warnings about, just making sure that people are staying in compliance. This is our MIW team over here on the failure to file tax and shipments reports. Our alternative dispute resolutions, we forwarded 0 to formal hearing this month. You can see that they're doing a lot of work resolving issues at an informal level. Now into the area of liquor compliance, youth access, you can see our liquor team was out there doing a number of compliance checks at 234 in October. This, of course, does not include delivery or curbside checks. We'll get to that next. And interestingly, we looked at last year as well, and October, for some reason, October was a little bit lower. So it'll be interesting to see if this jumps back up towards winter or not. But we are at a 76% compliance rate for October. You can see these delivery and curbside checks. We got 17 of those done. Compliments to Captain Dixon's team. We had an overall 53% compliance, but notably 83% compliance in delivery and 37% compliance in curbside. When we look at our cannabis compliance rate, we did 69 checks with a 91% compliance rate. So it's good to see that back up closer to where we're used to seeing it. And then tobacco and vapor is up to 93% out of 94 checks this month. This I always like to show you just to give you a great visual of how many licensees that we're just making basic premise check visits to. And then of course you can see in the rolling year what percentage of these licensees up here in the right our officers are making contact with. And so that cannabis unit continues to keep those numbers high at 82% in the rolling year. So they're all doing great work and getting out there and seeing a high number of licensees. ID checks for youth access. When we're out doing premise checks and having contacts for other reasons, we encourage officers to do ID checks. We believe that this is another way to impact youth access. You can see that we're not doing a lot of those in our tobacco and vapor teams. And so we're talking about doing some training and education internally about how to get that moving again. There was some law changes that I think have made people a little hesitant. And so we'll be talking about how to move forward with that in a way that everybody's comfortable. When we look at the CRY unit, as we would expect, those cannabis renewals drive these numbers up as we start to approach the end of the year. Licensing hits us hard with those cannabis license renewals. And then you'll see we also had 98 off. Oh, I don't think it's reflected here, but I have it in my notes. We had 98 officer requests. So when they're out doing surveillance or other types of checks, they're getting information about who we're dealing with. So they're doing good work in this unit. And then just an idea of what's going on in our examiner unit. You can see down at the bottom, they had 13.5 hours of field time this month. And I really like this tracking at the bottom where they're supporting our enforcement cannabis unit quite a bit more. If you remember when we transitioned this unit from the director's office to enforcement, we were really excited about having it serve the purpose of supporting our officers in the field with that traceability information. You can see that our advertising requests are increasing a bit more, and our general requests for advertising. And then FDA, we're usually out there doing about 300 checks a month. Additionally, in our FDA unit, we're a little bit low this month because we were down 1 FTE, but we did get that filled right at the end of October. So we're excited to be back on track at 100% zero vacancies with that unit. And then we had one complaint that came in with 2 different allegations, and we were able to fully investigate that. And both of those angles were unfounded. And then, of course, the always interesting for enforcement and education is our hiring and recruiting data. So we have currently 6 that we're hoping will very shortly go to the final offer process. They are in the final stages of a background, and 10 still working through a background, and we are getting some hiring done every month. And so this is just something we continue to work very hard at. And I appreciate the board's support as we work through things that will help us, like salary and recruiting and retention incentives as well. So thank you very much for that. And that's everything I would just like to share with you. There's a lot of great work going on in enforcement. As you know, you saw a wonderful example of a partnership between licensees and enforcement and licensing this morning. I sent out an email, which I think you've had the opportunity to see. I'm just very proud of them. Those pilot projects were a work in progress, and our staff was flexible and made adjustments, and they communicated well with our licensees. And that was just, and then they did a wonderful presentation to the board and gave you all the information you needed, answered your questions, and that was just a great outcome. We are working on a review of a 2018 audit. We are working with FBI and the Washington State Patrol about reviewing our access to our criminal history data. You saw that CRI unit information, so we're working on that for the agency as well. And we are working on an electric vehicle project, not to mention partnering with communications for our annual report. So staff are doing a lot of great work in addition to partnering with our licensees for compliance. Do you have any questions?
I have a quick comment.
Go ahead.
So I'm glad that you brought up the presentation to the board this morning. I thought it was excellent. I really enjoyed it quite a bit. I enjoyed it for a number of reasons, but that collaboration that it showed, not only with our external partners, but internally, was fantastic. So thank you and Becky and your staffs for that. I also wanted to comment, the number of checks we do, I think, is impressive, especially considering we've got vacancies. I am not happy with the compliance rate for alcohol and youth. I think that number is not, we've got to do something about that. And I don't know what the answer is, but I want to just raise alarms with that number.
Well, I would agree with you.
Thank
And we have talked about some of those things, and I think we'll be bringing something for it. We have to do something because the industry's not doing it themselves. And we will find some ways to help them comply. You can look at the cannabis side, and I know it's a different world and a different industry, but they're doing quite well. I'd like it to be 100%, but over 90 feels pretty good.
Yeah.
It really is the exception when you see that. Tobacco is doing better than alcohol.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say you're right. The number of checks we do and the amount of times we can get our staff out there doing those compliance checks. And that's the part of that is our staff work, is doing those compliance checks. They do a great job with that. And then looking at other ways that the agency and maybe our public health partners can help impact those numbers as well is important. And it was part of our strategic planning discussion. So we are looking at how we can do that, and remembering that the laws and rules for cannabis are different. So the way in which they operate their businesses are different. There are places that serve alcohol that also allow youth to be on the premises. So
Yeah.
it makes it
I'm
a
not
little challenging.
I'm not sure where this fits in the conversation, but since this presentation this morning, when fake IDs were brought up, I've done some quick search online to see what other places are doing. I would love to have more of a conversation about that. You know, what are we doing? What can we do? What's in our role and responsibility? What is the vendor responsibility, the retailer responsibility? I just would love to have a conversation about that at some point.
Is that something you want to talk about in our one-on-one, or do something a little bit differently? I'll work with Dustin.
Let's do it in our one-on-one next time and then see where it goes. But I'm talking about a conversation beyond you and I, but
I
with
understand.
others as well at some point.
Okay, let's come up with a plan for that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Don't see any, no. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Communications with Director Brian Smith.
Thank you, Chair Postman and members Vollendroff and Garrett. Media's been a little bit brisk lately. Namely, we put out 2 communications that got quite a bit of attention. The first being the emergency suspension of the cannabis lab, True Northwest. I really didn't anticipate a ton of media on that, but that seemed to be picked up by mainstream news media as well as nationwide. The cannabis types of publications, standard types of questions on that, that we were able to handle fine. But anyway, just shows you that the action you take on these emergency suspensions, especially in the cannabis world, get a lot of attention. The others, I'm not sure how up to speed you are, but there was Trichrome Northwest, or Trichrome, which is a tobacco retailer out of the Seattle area. Our tobacco unit had served a search warrant based on a complaint that they had that there was illegal drug activity. Namely, they found a number of materials that they believed to be set up for distribution. There was besides alcohol and cannabis products in there, there were what appeared to be psilocybin mushrooms that were set up for distribution to go out. They were tagged, weighed, there were scales and things in there, and a sealed refrigerator that was locked with a cable. Got a second search warrant, went back in, and found additional things that was part of that. So thanks to the enforcement team that brought this to our attention, and we try and support them and put that out there. The state crime lab is doing an analysis of that. And so we'll see what all that eventually adds up to. Felt a little early to be able to get out there with that until we know all the things, but at the same time, it was breaking.
Can I comment really quick?
Sure can.
So I went on a vape ride along, my first one, with the 2 officers that did that bust, I guess I will call it, for lack of a better word. But they were at that vape shop in King County for over 11 hours because it's such a process to get a search warrant and go through all of the steps. And, they explained the process to me. They were so dedicated, and every county is different with getting a search warrant. And they, of course, work in numerous counties at the same time. So I was just very impressed with everything they did. And of course, LCB has to bring up an evidence van from down here to go pick up those refrigerators and everything else. And so it was just a heck of a lot of work for them. Yeah. And I was just very impressed, and I enjoyed the ride along to boot.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And Captain Lori Sigmund was the one that was working on that. She was not available for a TV interview, so Julie actually did a television interview on King 5. I think it was the first one that she's done since she's been at the LCB, but she did fine, but she was a little bit wondering how she did. So she did fine. But you can, if you check out the news clips posted on the intranet, or maybe you get them emailed to you, maybe take a look for that and see how she did. So this time of year is when things tend to kind of crunch and come together for me as well. As you heard Chandra say, the deadline for the annual report is today. So the divisions are feeding my team their content. We generate a bunch of original content as well that goes into that annual report, and we lay it out and put it together. And that all really kind of begins today for us. It'll push all the way through December, just so you know that goes on. You'll have a chance to take a look at it before we get to the very end. We've also, and I've spoke here a little bit before about some things that we're getting going on the technology side with the communications team and how we're involved. A lot of that stuff is going to be behind the scenes, but they're significant in the sense that it's going to impact a lot of resources around the agency going forward. You heard Tony say a little bit about how the IT division was struggling to fill some positions. So we had 3 people that were pretty much assigned to us to help us work through the SharePoint Online. 2 of them either have left or is leaving. And so we're kind of like, we reached a point where we're struggling to find people to help us do the IT part of things. George is obviously working very hard at that, but it's pushed back the schedule a little bit on our ability to be able to move forward. And so my team all has a role in that. Sam over here, and myself, and Brad in particular are really pushing that thing through. But I wanted you to be aware of that as we go along. You'll periodically hear me give updates. But the other thing is also, which was the case with our intranet, is it had reached the end of its life and you have to replace it. So we're having to do this on the intranet, but we also have to do this with the website now. And so we'll be rolling out the website next year. What they're recommending to me is that we drop the platform that we're currently on and move to an entirely different platform. So it's not a matter of just closing one down and flipping a light to doing one else. You have to, it's just a lot of work across the agency that has to go into creating the new things. And if we do move to a new platform, that will have to be a training ability, right? We're going to have to learn ourselves as well as be able to train anyone that's going to be able to use it, because people do contribute to the website across the agency that we give permissions to. And I tell the board this in particular because I think that the website is the front door to the agency. It's like where people go to really kind of learn for the first time or get access to the information. And so it'll have a significant impact as to how we look and appear to the public, and that'll be coming, all through this. And at the same time, it's all connected to SMP. So we're kind of doing a little tight wire act as we go through this and trying to do it, put it all together. I wish I could say that I was completely, in control of all this, but I feel a little bit like I'm out of control of some of these things. I've lost control, but I'm gonna claw it all back and get it all before we get to the very end. But and then just lastly, last couple of things. You've heard me say before that the governor's office is going to be coming out with a plain language executive order. Now they keep Jamie Smith as the communications director for the governor, and she's let us know. I mean, there's going to be some significant impacts, I think, to agencies overall, and a broad sort of expectation that we'll have time to be able to do. Plain language stuff is something that Julia and my team really enjoys, and will be able to help us as whatever we need to do over time. But it's coming soon. I know it's probably going to come, I would imagine, the next couple of weeks, but we'll wait and see. But they've been giving agencies heads up and stuff that this is going to be rolling through. As you know, Julie is also spreading her time with the SMP project. So trying to access her skill set for some of these things can sometimes be challenging, but we got a good solid team to go along. And to wrap it up is that Friday is Veterans Day, and so Sam Gooder on my team has reached out to HR and will be profiling the veterans of the agency in a special edition that'll be coming out tomorrow. And she also did a nice write-up with a good quote from board member Vollendroff about the previous prevention conference and Mary's award and the agency's award there. And so looking forward to rolling that out tomorrow, and hopefully people can see that before they're off for the holiday, especially the veterans of the agency.
Perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome. Is there any
Any
questions?
questions? Right.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, Justin Orderhorn, Policy and External Affairs Director.
All right, good afternoon. Chair Postman, members Garrett and Vollendroff. A few updates. I'll try to cover just a little bit on each area that we cover in the policy unit. So we've got obviously a number of rules. You're pretty much up to speed based on some of the presentations, but we do have a new employee starting next week, new rules coordinator. So we're excited to get that person on. And we do have our former rules coordinator that was out on leave, starting to be able to engage and come back. And so we're really excited. We're almost at full staff here, and it's going to be pretty healthy for us to be able to move forward. As you heard from Mark, the alcohol delivery recommendation was completed, and we did have a couple conversations. I've had it with Public Health and also Small Grocers Association. And although they haven't seen the report, we were able to kind of cover some of the highlights of that. Everybody basically shared there was no surprises and they're actually supportive. And so we haven't had any concerning feedback from those folks that we've been in contact with around that. So we're pretty hopeful that that's going to be well received in that area. We also have in our public health area, we have a new public health liaison who's going to be kind of taking over the reins from Mary. So obviously Mary's going to, if folks didn't know, Mary's retiring at the end of the year. And so we have a great opportunity for this double fill to be able to bring Kristen Haley on. And she has a particularly robust background in media campaigns for Department of Health. And so she has a health background. And actually, she just won a national award for some of her former work at the health department for a campaign she managed promoting COVID-19 vaccinations, where she had a tremendous amount of community and partner input. And so, that kind of caliber we're bringing on to the agency, and I'm really excited for the future of that.
She started next week.
She started on the 1st of November. So
I thought
she's, yeah.
Okay, great.
So the rules coordinator starts next week, and then she started
That's
2 weeks ago,
Great.
or a week ago. So she shared with me that if she bursts out giggling today, that she's not crazy. It's just she's excited about her award. Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
We also are going to be engaging in the or participating in the Healthy Youth Survey planning starting next week. So we're going to be a partner in that particular front. On the tribal area, we have a number of compacts we're still working on and trying to kind of work through some of the changes that we've been seeing in the overall government interest from the governor's office and whatnot. So there's some different parameters that we're working with tribes on. And so you haven't seen a new compact come out recently, but we're very hopeful. We've been able to find negotiations and compromises with every tribe so far. So I have full confidence that we're going to be able to find the appropriate solutions as we move forward in these areas. And we've also been doing some more outreach for tribes with surveys, trying to get input on how they would like to see the engagement from the LCB. We also had interaction with the booth that was set up at the Centennial Accord this year. And so we had presence there for both days. We're able to introduce Will to a number of tribal leaders. And I thought that was a really positive interaction for us at the Centennial Accord. We also have done some intentional outreach to tribes on some of the policy issues that we've been engaged with, particularly when we see and identify that this policy, whether it's in rule or whatnot, has an impact to tribes. We're reaching out to them. They don't typically always want to get involved in all of the public meetings, and so we're trying to do some specific outreach to get that feedback, so we have that representation in the overall feedback that we have. Moving into the research area, we've had some research projects that our team has started to engage in. So they just completed some work around outlet density. And so if you remember in 5080, we're supposed to bring forward recommendations on or we're having rule the number of licenses per county. And so the local authorities have the option in the statute to also create ordinances around the number that they feel is appropriate within their county. And so we thought it was prudent to be able to look at some information in a global manner on outlet density. So they looked at things in alcohol, tobacco, and cannabis, some of the literature that was out there. So that when we start going down this area, we'll be able to provide some information and education to local governments on how we're seeing things. And we also have a regression model that we looked at that we're still in discussions on how to identify the number for each county. But it's really brought out some really strong discussions, and I think we're going to be in a good place. The thing I wanted to point out around this is both in 5080 and 5448, the way that the language came out of the legislature has created some complexities that weren't, first like, oh, this is really clear and identified that this is going to be an issue. So in 5080, we're going to be building these rules around, as you heard this morning, and thank you for opening those rules up. We're going to have those rules in place, but the caps that we're going to have established really won't come into play until we ask the legislature for more or recommend an increase in licenses. So with 5080, we're going to issue the 52 licenses, and then this type of information will come into play. So we're like well over a year out. So we're going to be creating the rules long before this will actually be in effect. And so we've got some time to try to work with that, but we do want to build it into the rules right now. And so with the limitations on the caps, there's some double rollout standards. We've got the first one where they can go anywhere in the state, and then we have the caps that'll come in after that. Because the 5080 says right now that they don't have to abide by the caps in the counties. Right. So that's kind of where that complexity kind of folds in there. On the 5448 rule, we have, the way the language came out of the legislature, we have some issues that have created confusion around previous endorsements and the new endorsement. And both are actually living together at the same time. So often we see legislation that comes out that basically replaces the old policy, but this is kind of in conjunction with and living on side of this policy. So we've been having more robust discussions in the rules. Becky's team has highlighted some really important details, and it's really helped us drill down into how are we going to do this with the old and the new. And so I think we've got a much better handle on what that looks like. It's also part of the recommendation that we moved into so they could see those nuances, but a number of complexities in those areas. And so kind of going back into the research area, the outlet density is really going to help inform on the 5080 rule development. The other project that they're going to start picking up, we had a good conversation again with enforcement licensing around product placement in our public health area. So we're seeing a lot of the crossover products kind of coming into conversations on where should these be. There's a lot of concerns, as we've, I think, shared before on product placement, where you may see it next to a non-alcohol product that looks very similar and those types of things. And so the general consensus is there should be a discussion around product placement and is there a need for that regulation. So we're going to start with the research on that and try to see what's out there from a literature review standpoint and bring that to the conversation so that can inform the discussion before we have a discussion without any baseline. And so I'm really excited for the research team to be able to start digging into that particular area and see what we can find so we have that objective data to be looking at.
Can I note on that? So, we've been hearing from people in state about those concerns, getting photographs. And when we meet with public health, we hear of it every time. It's been problems around the country as well. I wrote to the industry to ask them, got nothing back from them. And so we've sent a follow-up to associations, see what they'll have to say. But at this point, I'm very interested in seeing what we can do as the next step. I think we tried to look for some, sort of volunteer efforts, common sense approach to separating alcohol and non-alcoholic products, alcoholic products from, sort of children-related products. All those, again, I think of as common sense and got zero. So I just want to encourage that research, and then if we can move to trying to do something about it, I think it's time to do that.
Yeah, and I think when we look.
Can I make a quick comment before we move on from that?
Please, yeah.
Chair Postman, I just wanted to make sure that you were aware at the Prevention Summit, the letter that you sent to industry was specifically discussed with appreciation, which recognizing that the LCB is working to improve and giving, we want businesses to thrive and we want businesses to be able to sell to adults, et cetera. But at the same time, we have a deep commitment to making sure that product is kept out of the hands of young people. So that was brought up and appreciated at the summit. I just wanted you to be aware.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, again, I just think it's not the biggest thing we're going to do to help people, but it's one of the simplest. Like, just don't do it.
Yeah, and there's two issues around product placement that are concurrent with one another. One is the product, how it's placed next to where it's located in the store as far as the associated products around it. The other one is securing the minis. Yeah. And we've seen in pictures from in-state where they're basically marketed at the impulse area, very easy to access, very easy potentially to steal as well. So I think that there's some youth access implications with that. And so that's one of the areas that we want to also incorporate in the discussion of product placement and what would be appropriate there.
The other thing, which I've read about from other states as well, is, the way this whole sort of new line of alcoholic drinks are coming out, they look less and less like alcoholic drinks and more like soda and punch and all these other things. Even when they're right next to each other, it's hard to know. You got to read that whole label to see if this cider or this fruit punch is alcoholic or not.
Yeah, and some of the discussion that gets really challenging is we have some regulations around, especially appealing to children. But when you start talking about pop, soft drinks, it's marketed to all ages. So, I think that one strategy could be around the product placement versus trying to determine whether a package is appealing or not. If we can create that separation, then it may mitigate some of those risks. The other area that we have that we're working on, because there is a potential legislation around this, but we were also talking about it internally, is having a dashboard of sorts for our research area, so people can see what we're researching, what kind of data we're having, and accessibility. So that's really at the beginning stages right now, but that's some ideas that we're working with. And then identifying resources for the research program. Trying to figure out appropriate budgets moving forward. There's a number of different avenues to get information, and we want to make sure that we're utilizing the best practices in research. And so we've actually reached out to other state research programs. We've talked to them during the setup, but we're also talking to them now and saying, okay, now that it's been another year, what have you seen? Have you done anything different? Those types of things. And we have a recruitment out for the research manager. So I'll be screening some of the applications this week, hopefully setting up some interviews in the next few weeks. And we're excited to have that be moving forward. The last a couple things I'll mention is we are monitoring. I don't have a lot of information around this right now, but we are keeping a pulse, if we can, on this descheduling conversation federally. That's definitely a topic of conversation in camera and something that we want to look at and how that may roll out. And then we also have had conversations around the biometric discussion that keeps coming up. You heard that again this morning during the presentation from stakeholders, and so that's going to be a continuing conversation. I had a conversation last week with a national stakeholder that predominantly works out of Texas and Florida. They worked with different governments on some of these, and they had a different perspective than we've heard from other stakeholders in the industry. So I thought that was really valuable, and that might be something we may need to have a work session on or something. Yeah. But we also, Brian's been really helpful on reaching out to Department of Licensing, trying to get information at least to them, if not, if they're going to be involved in the conversation, because at some point they'll get questions and we don't want to catch them off guard that we're doing it this all on our own.
Member Vollenbroek.
Just interestingly enough, since this morning I got an email from somebody asking questions or just suggesting that maybe the biometrics might be part of the fake ID conversation. So I just wanted to throw that out there. I think it's a really important thing for us to stay involved in and be a leader in, as opposed to sitting back and seeing what happens. So I appreciate everybody's work and staying involved in that.
I would say, because I've been thinking about this and talking with some people about it, and I agree with you, we need to be involved, but what I feel a little uncomfortable about is I think we have some people who are looking to us, because that rules petition essentially had come to us, that proposal had come to us, for us to break that ground. And the policy behind, these things, particularly concerned about consumer privacy, data privacy in general, how people of color are treated in these systems, is not a decision for us to make. We need state policy.
Correct.
With the safeguards that are put in here, with a broad reach of input into that kind of legislation, not situational, oh, we'll do it for this arena or we'll do it for alcohol. Because we don't have that technology. We don't have the capabilities to judge whether that data is secure, safe, or is working in a non-biased way. So we need to stay involved, but I don't, a little bit of this we sense too with the adult entertainment. It's like, yeah, you guys do it. You guys go out in front and do this. And it's like, well, we can do this much.
Yeah.
But we need state policy.
Yeah, I totally agree. We just need to be at the table. There are so many things to take into consideration in this, and it's going to take probably most state agencies to some degree being involved in the discussion.
Well, the legislature struggled with data privacy and these things for years now, 4 or 5 years consistently, and unable to take the big jump because it is incredibly hard to get your head around. Anyhow, sorry.
Yeah, the last thing I'll share is, we've been doing our check-ins with ledge staffers over the summer. Now it's kind of winding down since it's winding up, as Mark was pointing out. And we've got really positive feedback from the staff members that have been engaging in that. Unfortunately, fortunate probably for him, he gets new challenges, but one of the staff members is transitioning to another committee. So we'll be trying to fold up some new folks in, but really positive feedback, because during session, it's just so fast and furious. It's hard to get information to them. And so they've really appreciated, us taking the time to walk them through a number of these issues that are complex before, it gets to a committee. So when the members ask them, it's been real positive, and I just thought we should share that. And I don't know if you wanted to comment on that or not.
Yeah,
You've been involved in that.
Yeah, I think the biometric is a perfect example of that. Like, let's have some of these discussions in the interim where we don't need to start at a dead sprint when a bill drops. So yeah, they've been very, very helpful for staff, and they were great for me when I was learning these issues.
That's all I have.
Okay, great. Thank you. I am going to call back Becky Smith, who had something she wanted to add.
So
Yes.
thank you. And I just want to add to the biometrics conversation, because I do, that I mentioned to Justin, I really encourage you to take a look at the national level for NCSLA. It's a conversation that all states are having right now. Some of them have already approved, and and some are pulling back. So I think it's important that we take a look at what folks are doing in other states, especially with the liquor, the Department of Licensing, all of the above. So encourage you to reach out to that organization as well. But that's not what I wanted to share with all of you. I did want to share that in my social equity update, what I failed to mention was that we have 2 of our applicants that are moving forward with their build out / final inspection. They hope to be open before the 1st of the year. That very positive. This is quick for some folks. That one of them is in Snohomish County. The other one is in Ferry County. But again, their hope is to be open before January.
That's great news. Yeah.
So I'll
That
keep you-
is great
I'll-
news.
I'll keep you posted. We
Please,
staff,
yeah.
you know, that the manager staffs with the supervisor and the staff weekly to see where folks are and, you know, that and what they're struggling with. So good news. Very good news.
For sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks for that. Brian Smith wanted to add.
Yeah, I appreciate the biometrics conversation. One thing I forgot too was to let you guys know that Justin's going to go on TVW next week on the show, The Impact, have a 10-minute kind of conversation. You're absolutely right, is that things tend to stick to us, you know, when they should be sticking to other people as well. And so we have been trying to engage others in this thus far. They, as you said, kind of, they like us out doing that. But I think there's a lot more to come on this, and hopefully it won't be just us going forward, but I appreciate that.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I mean, I guess we shouldn't shy away from making state policy if that's what they want us to do here. But I think our mission is a little narrower than that, and we need to keep that in balance. So any final thoughts, Member Baldwin? Nope.
No,
Okay,
thank you.
don't see any other hands up from staff either. So thank you all. Thanks to the staff for the great reports today. There's lots of great work happening, and we always appreciate hearing the details. So with that, we will adjourn the meeting, and back next week, the board will be for caucus on Tuesday. Have a good day, everybody.
All right. Thanks. Bye, everybody.